Welcome to Enviro Close-Up. I am Carl Grossman, and with us are Doug Morse. He's editor and publisher of E, the environmental magazine, and Jim Motavalli. He's the managing editor. Now, I think one of the most remarkable things about E, and in a market, as you note, is often devoted to the superficial, is that you tackle the hard issues. For example, Jim, you had a wonderful cover story a while back on population, the forgotten issue.
Yeah, and we're revisiting that. We're working on it now. We're doing a big piece on population. And I think sort of the key to this is that the U.S. population, indeed the world population, is growing hugely. The world population has grown about 4 times in the last 100 years, which is unprecedented population growth. We're like 5.6 billion people on the planet right now. And we're looking at doubling that in 30 or 40 years, and that's just an incredible thing. But one of the keys to what we're writing about now is the way the U.S., particularly the Republican Congress, is defunding family planning around the world. I think this is one of the sort of stealth things they're doing, because a lot of people don't know about it, but it has devastating effects around the world, where the U.S. is the leading provider of family planning methods and materials around the world, as well as training local people to use family planning. And with that being defunded, and Congress has just linked that to the abortion issue in a way that I find totally crazed, because obviously anyone could figure out that if you take away family planning, you've got more pregnancies and therefore more abortions. So the Congress's action actually increases abortion, and the figures I've seen show about maybe 4 million more abortions because of what the Congress has done. That's one way that I see population increasing as a result of what the U.S. is doing. This is a very political part of it. There's lots of other ways of looking at it. Another political aspect of it is immigration. And in the population community, there's big disagreement of whether you stop immigration in the U.S. And there's groups like Negative Population Growth, which advocate cutting it from the current million a year to about 100,000 a year. And there's groups like Zero Population Growth. It's very easy to get these groups confused, which really don't take a strong position one way or the other on immigration. And some people look at the way they talk about immigration politics as racist, and you could look at it that way. So we go into that. We try to tackle this topic, which can be a very tough one.
You've devoted several issues to our gluttonous technological society. How much stuff is enough was the lead story on one front page of E, and are we shopping our planet to death? Another
that's an issue that I think is very closely related to population, because if you look at population just in terms of a numbers game, you can be all scared about the third world and their population growth, which is outstripping their birth rate is much higher than in the U.S. But if you look at consumption, how much of our planet's natural resources are consumed by one American versus one Bangladeshi, then you get an idea that Americans are really the resource gluttons and are really much more of a problem than the third world is, because one American's consumption equals 20 Indians' consumption. And we are the biggest consumers on the planet and the biggest resource gluttons. It's a major problem.
And of course now we're exporting that consumer ideology abroad. You know, American corporations are trying to develop markets in every last corner of the world. So, you know, billions of Chinese want to have 2 cars in the garage and all the things we have. And of course we appear chauvinistic, saying to them, don't do it. Because we've learned, you know, at least the environmental movement here has learned how damaging that can be to the environment. So it's very hard for us to sit where we're sitting and tell the rest of the world not to imitate our behavior. So it's a real dilemma.
With profit, the bottom line, that's, you know, life on Earth surviving. I would imagine that that's a hard kind of tendency to deal with.
Yeah.
There's also, I think, a very interesting new movement called voluntary simplicity, in which people are trying to step away from consumer culture, simplify their lives. And that has both a sort of personal enrichment dimension as well as an awareness of this resource gluttony business. So it is 2 things at once. For some people, it's just they're tired of all the clutter in their lives.
Essentially, population increases, you know, roll back progress in so many areas. You know.
Global warming, you say in your lead story on global warming, forget the naysayers. Why?
Well, we say that because I think there's a scientific consensus now emerging that global warming is coming, that it is here. And the people who say that there isn't a scientific consensus are just nonsensical.
They tend to get a lot of the press, though, the Rush Limbaughs and the front groups, as you call them, but the associations with the friendly-sounding environmental names that are actually funded by big business to kind of push back progress.
The United Nations put together a panel of 2,500 climate scientists, and they spent a long time studying this, and they recently came out with a report. They're very cautious, but they conclude there is a man-made global warming element. That what we're seeing is not simply natural, and that we really have to prepare for it and take care of it, which has huge implications for our economies, because obviously we'd have to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, which means reducing automobile emissions, and we're in no way prepared to do that right now.
When a journalist like John Stossel cast the question, are we scaring ourselves to death, whether it be on population or global warming or living like pigs, overconsumption, what's your kind of take on that?
Well, I think you can bury your head in the sand, ostrich-like, and pretend that these things aren't happening, but the real scientific evidence is overwhelmingly that they are happening. Population is not something people have made up as a scare tactic. The population is growing hugely in a way that's totally unprecedented in the last 1,000 years of human history. And if you look at that, you can't say it's a made-up crisis. It's a very real crisis. The same thing for global warming. We're facing the possibility in 30 or 40 years of very much rising sea levels, inundating whole island chains. I mean, that is not something to be taken lightly, and it's not something just crackpot scientists are talking about. So to say that's just a scare tactic is idiotic.
Actually, in spite of the naysaying, you know, there's mainstream recognition of that anyway. Major insurance companies now are factoring global warming effects such as erosion and rising sea levels in their rates, and cautioning people now more and more to not build near the water, and all this relates. So it's not just a fringe idea.
E-Magazine obviously is my favorite environmental magazine or publication of any sort, environmental publication of any sort. And here's another remarkable cover story. Plastic, can't live with it. Can't live without it. I think we can live a lot without it. And some of those ads from the plastic industries, and they talk about plastics and medicine and plastics and kids' toys and so forth. I mean,
artificial hearts, helmets, and things like that. Well, that article actually was an answer to the campaign under its previous name, which was let's take another look at plastics. So in an editorial meeting, we thought to ourselves, well, why don't we take another look at plastics? And in fact, that's the title of the article inside. Now I think the campaign is Plastics Make It Possible. They've changed the, you know, the title of it, but it's the same. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that we'd have to be real dogmatists to say that none of us want to use plastic of any kind. But the point is that it's not the benefits of plastic that we're complaining about. It's the downside of plastics, which is the inability to recycle all these different resins, and the industry has not, you know, done anything about that. They've spent more of their money on the public relations to convince us why we need plastic, and they've gone a bit out on a limb. You know, it's not like we're all walking around with artificial hearts. You know, I mean, most of the uses of plastic are not quite so dire, and you know, they need to get their act together and change the way they do things so that they can recycle, and to think about the entire loop, and not just you know, leave it at the dock when they're done with it, and then it's society's problem to clean it up and deal with the waste. You know, and that's a common theme in corporate behavior towards the environment.
In these days of environmental reporting by the mainstream media, often not really giving you all you need to know, E-Magazine, really indispensable for getting information about what's happening.
The bigger overarching issues, you know, they don't get they get short shrift in the mainstream media. You know, not so much in the print media, but on television. You know, the commentator's always pulling the microphone away from your face, and got to cut to a commercial, and it's all sound bites, and you know, you can't resolve major issues of our time in sound bites. You know, they're complicated.
Population is so big, it's so vast a topic, but it's not a daily news story. They don't do stories that say population still increasing in the New York Times.
It's not hard news.
This has been Enviro Close-Up on E-Magazine. Subscribe. Thanks for watching.